Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta, and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. The Bangko Sentral signals more rate cuts ahead as inflation drops to an over 5-year low of 1.4% in April. Transport Chief Vince Dizon reopens applications for jeepney operators to join the government's modernization drive. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney tells U.S. President Donald Trump that Canada is not for sale. And after 2 decades, internet calling platform Skype officially signs off. Let's take a look at how global markets moved overnight as investors weigh trade uncertainties and mixed signals out of Washington. U.S. stocks closed lower for a second straight session on Tuesday, with markets struggling to find direction amid contradictory comments from President Donald Trump and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on the timing of new trade deals. Trump said that the administration will review potential agreements over the next 2 weeks following his first meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. But that statement undercut earlier remarks from Bessent, who suggested a trade announcement would come as soon as this week.
The markets had a little bit of weakness yesterday and into today after a pretty nice run of 9 straight days of upward movement. Nothing too crazy, probably just waiting here a little bit on some earnings that are still trickling in this week. And then tomorrow we're going to have a Federal Reserve board meeting and waiting to hear if there's any new news in terms of interest rates. We're not expecting to hear anything too different from the last time. The Federal Reserve's gotten a little bit of a reprieve here because earnings have generally been okay. Tech earnings last week were actually probably better than what the market had been pricing in.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 1%, the S&P 500 lost 0.8%, and the Nasdaq fell by 0.9%. In Europe, it was a mixed session. London's FTSE 100 closed flat with a slight upward bias, while Germany's DAX fell 0.4%, and France's CAC 40 dropped 0.4%. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas signals the possibility of more rate cuts as inflation eases to its lowest level in over 5 years. Inflation slowed to 1.4% in April from 1.8% in March. This is the softest print since November of 2019, fueling expectations of looser monetary policy ahead. The central bank says this gives policymakers more flexibility to cut interest rates further to help the economy weather the global headwinds. Finance Secretary Ralph Recto also backs the view, saying that softer inflation creates the space to slash rates and to support domestic consumption, investment, and overall growth, especially amid heightened global uncertainty. The Department of Economy, Planning and Development welcomes the drop in April inflation, calling it a sign that government reforms are starting to deliver results. Sujin Kim has that story.
Philippine headline inflation plunged to 1.4% in April, marking a fresh 5-year low. This is the lowest inflation rate since the pre-pandemic period in 2019. One major driver of this inflation, the continued drop in rice prices. Rice inflation registered a double-digit decline year-on-year. Rice prices now range between 44 to 61 pesos per kilo across markets.
Of course, mas malaki ang impact pag umabot na dun sa 20 pesos na yung price. So substantial ang magiging contribution niya doon sa downward trend ng ating overall inflation. But of course, we will rely on the data that we will get.
Pork prices also helped temper April inflation. Pork prices dropped to the 320 to 390 peso range.
It's a slight drop, but the price difference is still substantial kasi nasa 10% pa rin.
Other drivers of the slowdown, moderating prices of transport fares, fish, corn, and other staple food. But inflation picked up in housing, water, electricity, and gas. These accounted for nearly 40% of total inflation.
Dahil tumataas talaga pag summer, so siguro nagkakaroon tayo ng pag-angat doon sa presyo dahil doon sa mga supply natin.
Dairy items including milk and eggs also saw price upticks.
Ang isa sa mga nag-contribute dito ay yung presyo ng itlog. Ang inflation rate ng eggs ay nasa 8.4% inflation noong Abril. Ito yung item na nagpataas sa inflation rate for this basket.
According to the BSP, inflation remains manageable, in line with their expectations and aided by lower global commodity prices. DepDev emphasized that the decline in inflation is proof that government reforms are working. Soojin Kim, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
Power rates are expected to drop this month, offering relief to millions of households and businesses as temperatures and electricity demand surge nationwide. Meralco says generation and transmission charges are likely to decline, driven by lower spot market prices and cheaper reserve power costs. According to the independent electricity market operator of the Philippines, spot market prices fell by 15.3% in April, thanks to ample supply and improved grid conditions. Market officials also expect more renewable power to come online this year, helping to ease price pressures in the months ahead. The rollback comes at a critical time as the country grapples with extreme heat and elevated power consumption. The Philippine government is likely done tapping international debt markets this year, with foreign borrowings already near target and no further global bond issuance expected. The Bureau of the Treasury says that the country has almost completed its foreign borrowing program for 2025, making a second global bond sale unlikely this year. The ADB's annual meeting, National Treasurer Sharon Alamanza there confirmed that the government has raised nearly $3.2 billion, just shy of the $3.5 billion foreign commercial borrowing program for the year. In January, the Philippines sold $3.29 billion worth of dollar and euro bonds, helping shore up budget support without overextending foreign debt. The Asian Development Bank is urging the Philippines to step up investments in agriculture and energy, two sectors seen as strategic enablers in navigating shifting global trade dynamics. The ADB says stronger domestic investments will help the country boost its export capacity and tap growth opportunities both regionally and globally amid heightened geopolitical uncertainties. The multilateral lender also notes that the Philippines is relatively less exposed to the full force of U.S. tariffs, facing a 17% duty, the second lowest in the region after Singapore. The ADB says this creates a window for the Philippines to strengthen its trade position, but only if the country can scale up infrastructure and production in key sectors. In a push to improve the ease of doing business and attract more investments, the Anti-Red Tape Authority is mandating all local governments to fully automate their business registration systems by 2028. The eBoss, or Electronic Business One-Stop Shop, will allow businesses to apply for permits, licenses, and clearances online through a single unified platform. As of March 31st, only 115 out of the country's 1,642 local government units are fully automated. ARTA says it has already issued 431 notices to non-compliant LGUs and plans to file cases against the 134 that have failed to respond. ARTA Chief Ernesto Perez says there's no reason for delay. A free government-developed system is already available, and excuses like funding or connectivity issues are no longer acceptable. The Office of the Ombudsman will determine sanctions for LGUs that continue to defy that directive. On another front, Transport Secretary Vince Dizon signals a green light for motorcycle taxis to keep operating despite the absence of an enabling law in a move aimed at protecting livelihoods and improving urban mobility. Dizon says he will sign a department order that will allow motorcycle taxis to continue operating while Congress deliberates on a law to formally legalize the sector. This comes after a meeting with Angkas founder George Rieca, where Dizon acknowledged the industry's role in providing income to thousands of riders, with at least 4,500 employed across 3 operators, Angkas, Joyride, and Move It. The original pilot program expired in 2024, but legislation has yet to catch up. Dizon, however, stresses that operators must comply fully with the department's new rules on road safety and driver qualifications to continue operations legally. Transport Secretary Vince Dizon reopens the application period for public utility vehicle operators who have yet to consolidate their franchise under the government's modernization program. This came after Dizon's dialogue with various transport groups last month, where he ordered a comprehensive review of the program's implementation. The original deadline for consolidation already expired last year, but the latest decision gives the unregistered operators time to comply. We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Let's check on how Asian markets are doing this morning. Right now, let's take a look at that. Here in Asia, Nikkei 225 is down by 0.1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is so much higher, up by 1.6%. Shanghai's Composite higher by 0.6%, and Singapore's Straits Times Index in the red, lower by 0.2%. Now, here at home, Philippine shares extended their winning streak Tuesday as April inflation came in much lower than expected, boosting market sentiment. The PSEI climbed 1% to close at 64.19 after data showed that April inflation eased to 1.4%, the lowest since 2019. Now, with inflation low, well below target, investors are growing more bullish, pricing in possible rate cuts and further upside in the equities market. Right now, the main gauge as of 10:16 this morning is in the green, higher by 0.8% to 64.70. All shares index up as well, up by 0.2% to 37.54. All the sub-indices are in positive territory right now, led by the services and mining and oil counters, which are up by about 1%. Now, total volume is at 159 million, value at 848 million pesos. Market breadth is positive with 82 advancers, 30 decliners, and 37 stocks unchanged. In the currency market, the peso opens stronger at 55.40 to the dollar, appreciating from Monday's close of 55.61. Now, Petron Corporation, led by Bilyonaryo Ramon Ang, posts a net income of 4.03 billion in the first quarter of 2025. That's pesos. Now, holding steady despite global headwinds in the oil sector. Consolidated revenues fell to 194.38 billion pesos from 227.64 billion year on year, dragged by lower crude prices and softer trading volumes from its Singapore operations. Operating income also eased to 9.47 billion, down from 11.1 billion last year, but still above market expectations. Petron attributed the slight dip to geopolitical tensions, volatile oil prices, and tariff-related uncertainties. Chairman Ramon Ang says the company remains committed to defending its market leadership amid a challenging external environment. Ayala Land reports a 10% increase in first quarter net income to 6.9 billion pesos, powered by strong gains in its property development and leasing divisions. Consolidated revenues hit 43.6 billion pesos, with property development income up 11%, driven by solid sales of premium residential units and commercial lots. Leasing revenues rose 7%, backed by stable mall occupancy and continued growth in office and hospitality segments. The company launched 4 new projects worth 12.6 billion and spent 20.6 billion in capital expenditures focused on residential units and estate infrastructure. Ayala Land also signed a land lease agreement with Metro Pacific Agro Ventures to build a high-tech greenhouse in Palawan, supporting its hospitality supply chain. First Gen Corporation reports a net income of $82.3 million in the first quarter of the year. That's 4.4% higher than the $78.8 million recorded in the same period last year. The Lopez-led firm says that the gain was driven by lower operating expenses. Netflix subscribers in the Philippines will now pay more to stream as the 12% value-added tax on digital services takes effect. Netflix has adjusted its prices this month. The premium plan is now at 619 pesos, up from 549 pesos, while the standard plan has risen to 449 pesos from 399 pesos. The price hike follows compliance with Republic Act 12023, imposing a 12% VAT on digital services such as streaming platforms, online marketplaces, and search engines. Now, the Bureau of Internal Revenue expects to collect 105 billion pesos by 2029 as the government expands its tax net to include global tech players operating locally. We're taking a short break. Business 360 will be right back. Malacanang declares May 12th a special non-working holiday to encourage voter participation in the midterm elections. Nearly 69 million Filipinos are registered to vote, according to the Commission on Elections. COMELEC Chair George Garcia calls on the public to turn out and vote, citing its impact on democratic institutions and future policy making. The Commission on Elections cracks down on candidates days before the midterms, issuing show-cause orders over alleged violations of fair campaign rules and anti-discrimination policies. In question, San Jose City Mayor Mario Salvador, former Caloocan Representative Edgar Erice, and mayoral candidate Faith Francisco are all facing possible sanctions for questionable campaign conduct. The COMELEC has also filed a motu proprio disqualification petition against Silang Cavite mayoral candidate Alston Kevin Anara after he made controversial remarks about solo parents during his campaign. As the country prepares for a crucial midterm vote, the poll body says it's working to preserve the integrity of the electoral process, a key pillar of political and economic stability. Business leaders and investors are closely watching as policy continuity and governance credibility depend on the outcome. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. orders a full investigation into the fatal crash at NAIA, raising broader questions about safety standards, accountability, and infrastructure procurement at the country's main gateway. The accident, which killed 2 people over the weekend, involved metal bollards that failed to do their job. Installed in 2019 at a cost of 8 million pesos, the bollards were meant to protect pedestrians and structures. But Transportation Secretary Vince Dizon says that they weren't buried deep enough, a design and installation failure now under scrutiny.
Ngayon, pinapaimbestigahan natin, nag-utos ng ating Pangulo, pinaimbestigahan na natin yan, kinukuha na natin lahat ng dokumento. 2019 yan binigay at kinabit. So, pinapakuha natin lahat ng dokumento, pinapaaral natin sa mga engineer. Meron niyang mga standard, international yan sa mga airport. So, aalamin natin kung tumupad ba sa standard yung pagkabit ng mga bollard na yan. So, kung hindi, may problema yan. At kailangan may managot dyan.
President puts a spotlight on public safety risks at strategic infrastructure sites and the need for stronger oversight in PPP execution. Ramon Ang, the president of the consortium now managing NAIA, has pledged to replace all the bollards across the terminals as the private sector moves to prevent a similar failure. Now, the Philippine Coast Guard says it is convinced that China is carrying out illegal scientific research within the country's exclusive economic zone. A Chinese research vessel was recently spotted off the coast of Ilocos Norte. Coast Guard operatives intercepted and drove the vessel away, documenting its activities on video. The PCG believes that the ship was engaged in unauthorized deep-sea mapping, which, if true, could signal an attempt to gather strategic or resource-related data without Philippine consent.
I would like to believe that this kind of this operation, that we really provided enough evidence that the Chinese government is really carrying out illegal marine scientific research within our own exclusive economic zone. It basically strengthens the possibility that the drones that we were able to monitor in different parts of the country really came from the Chinese government, since they are the ones who never really hesitate to violate the UNCLOS and to disrespect our sovereign rights within our own exclusive economic zone. It is worrisome, nakakabahala in a way na it's because these Chinese research vessels have the capability for deep sea mapping, no?
With the West Philippine Sea rich in energy and marine resources and global interest in undersea cables and critical minerals growing, the sighting raises urgent questions about maritime security and enforcement. The Taguig Regional Trial Court orders the Makati City government to turn over public facilities in the 10 Embo barangays, marking a major step in a territorial dispute that could have wide-ranging implications for urban planning, business permitting, and local tax collection. The order covers health centers, covered courts, multi-purpose halls, and daycare facilities, all critical to barangay-level service delivery. The court also issued a temporary restraining order barring Makati from blocking Taguig officials from taking control of the facilities. The ruling follows the Supreme Court's final decision in 2022, which transferred jurisdiction of the Embo barangays, including parts of Bonifacio Global City, to Taguig. Legal experts say that the ongoing transition could affect everything from business permit renewals and real estate assessments to local tax collection and public service delivery in one of Metro Manila's most economically strategic zones. We're taking a quick breather. Business 360 will be right back. Welcome back. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says no decisions were reached on tariffs during his meeting Tuesday with U.S. President Donald Trump, despite escalating trade uncertainty between the two nations. Speaking to reporters in Washington, Carney called the talks wide-ranging and constructive, but admitted that the process remains a complex negotiation. The Canadian leader also responded to Trump's recent comments about Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state, saying, quote, Canada is not for sale.
The president has made known his wish about that issue for some time. I've been careful always to distinguish between wish and reality. I was clear there in the Oval Office, as I've been clear throughout on behalf of Canadians, that this is never going to happen. Canada is not for sale. It never will be for sale. Some things, as I said in the room, some things are never for sale, and he agreed with that. So I distinguish between the two, and then with respect to the importance of reestablishing a constructive relationship for negotiations of a partnership, of an economic and security partnership, which is what we were here for. I look forward, not back, and I think we established a good basis today.
President Trump, who has threatened new tariffs on several trade partners, joked that he is unlikely to call Carney governor, a title he used repeatedly with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The meeting comes as North American supply chains remain under scrutiny, with investors watching closely for signs of escalation. A new flashpoint is emerging in South Asia after India launched missile strikes into Pakistani territory on Wednesday, marking a sharp escalation in one of the world's most volatile borders. India says that these strikes targeted what it called terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Pakistan confirmed the attacks and reported at least 3 fatalities, adding that it will respond at a time of their choosing. The escalation renews tensions between the 2 nuclear-armed states, which have fought 3 wars, mostly over the disputed Kashmir region. For investors and multinationals operating in South Asia, the developments raise fresh concerns about geopolitical risks in a region that accounts for over 20% of the global population and plays a growing role in manufacturing, outsourcing, and regional supply chains. The United Kingdom and India finalized a landmark free trade agreement projected to boost bilateral trade by $34 billion by 2040. The deal, sealed after 3 years of on and off talks, lowers tariffs on key exports like whiskey and cars, opens Indian public contracts to British firms, and relaxes visa rules for Indian professionals. It marks Britain's most significant post-Brexit trade pact and is expected to add $6.4 billion a year to the UK economy by 2040. While modest compared to Britain's $3.3 trillion economy, the agreement is seen as a strategic win, especially amid global trade uncertainties triggered by US President Donald Trump's escalating tariff regime. Microsoft is officially shutting down Skype, ending a 2-decade run for one of the world's first and most recognizable internet calling platforms. Skype revolutionized communications in the early 2000s, pioneering internet-based voice and video calls and amassing hundreds of millions of users. Microsoft bought the platform for $8.5 billion in 2011. But as work moved to cloud and mobile-first tools, Skype lost ground to faster, more reliable rivals. Microsoft now wants to streamline its product line, shifting focus to Microsoft Teams, its flagship platform for enterprise communications. Users can still log into Teams with their Skype credentials and migrate chat histories until early 2026. For the business community, this marks the end of an era and the beginning of a more integrated future for workplace collaboration.
Skype had its moment. It was really revolutionary back in 2003. It really democratized video calling. It enabled things, it enabled people to have video calls who weren't members of a big corporation and didn't have expensive equipment. So from that perspective, I think it will remain very important as a part of the history of virtual remote work and just the way that we work. It was the future of work back in 2003.
Elsewhere in the world, the Vatican seals off the Apostolic Palace, signaling the start of the conclave to elect a new pope. The historic ritual marks the beginning of the papal election process, with 133 cardinals under the age of 80 set to cast their ballots inside the Sistine Chapel starting today, May 7th. The Apostolic Palace, which houses the papal apartments, offices, and the chapel itself, has been closed off to secure full secrecy and security. Vatican officials and the Swiss Guard placed a seal labeled Conclave 2025 on the entrance, signifying that no outside contact will be permitted until a new pope is chosen. The outcome of the conclave will have far-reaching implications for the Catholic Church's global influence, diplomatic engagements, and humanitarian priorities. The Vatican is now fully prepared for the conclave as the world waits for the election of a new pope. Inside the Sistine Chapel, tables have been set for more than 100 cardinals, all under age 80, who will cast their votes beneath Michelangelo's iconic frescoes. Vatican officials have also prepared the traditional Room of Tears, where the newly elected Pope will first don his papal robes. Cardinals participating in the secret vote will be sequestered in 2 guest houses under strict rules barring any outside communication. As is tradition, the world will watch the smoke. Ballots from each round of voting will be burned in a chimney above the chapel. Black smoke means no decision. White smoke will signal that a new pope has been chosen. Now in London, Britain's monarchy is making headlines, but this time through art and symbolism. King Charles and Queen Camilla have unveiled their official coronation portraits at the National Gallery, marking 2 years since the UK's largest state ceremony in decades. The portraits, painted by British artists Peter Cuffold and Paul Benny, highlight the royal family's ongoing cultural influence, with the monarchy remaining a major driver of British soft power and tourism. With the royal brand estimated to be worth billions to the UK economy, moments like these, steeped in tradition and modern relevance, continue to shape global perceptions of the United Kingdom. We're taking a break. When we return, another look at our top stories. You're watching Business 360. Welcome back. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas signals the possibility of more rate cuts as inflation eases to its lowest level in over 5 years. Inflation slowed to 1.4% in April from 1.8% in March, the softest print since November 2019, fueling expectations of looser monetary policy ahead. The central bank says this gives policymakers more flexibility to cut interest rates further to help the economy weather global headwinds. Finance Secretary Ralph Recto also backs the view, saying softer inflation creates space to slash rates and support domestic consumption, investment, and overall growth, especially amid heightened global uncertainty. Now, the Department of Economy, Planning and Development welcomes the drop in April inflation, calling it a sign that government reforms are starting to deliver results. Sujin Kim has that story.
Philippine headline inflation plunged to 1.4% in April, marking a fresh 5-year low. This is the lowest inflation rate since the pre-pandemic period in 2019. One major driver of this inflation, the continued drop in rice prices. Rice inflation registered a double-digit decline year-on-year. Rice prices now range between 44 to 61 pesos per kilo across markets.
Of course, mas malaki ang impact pag umabot na dun sa 20 pesos na yung price. So substantial ang magiging contribution niya doon sa downward trend ng ating overall inflation. But of course, we will rely on the data that we will get.
Pork prices also helped temper April inflation. Pork prices dropped to the 320 to 390 peso range.
It's a slight drop, but the price difference is still substantial kasi nasa 10% pa rin.
Other drivers of the slowdown, moderating prices of transport fares, fish, corn, and other staple food. But inflation picked up in housing, water, electricity, and gas. These accounted for nearly 40% of total inflation.
Dahil tumataas talaga pag summer, so siguro nagkakaroon tayo ng pag-angat doon sa presyo dahil doon sa mga supply natin.
Dairy items including milk and eggs also saw price upticks.
Ang isa sa mga nag-contribute dito ay yung presyo ng itlog. Ang inflation rate ng eggs ay nasa 8.4% inflation noong Abril. Ito yung item na nagpataas sa inflation rate for this basket.
According to the BSP, inflation remains manageable, in line with their expectations and aided by lower global commodity prices. DepDev emphasized that the decline in inflation is proof that government reforms are working. Sujin Kim, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
Power rates are expected to drop this month, offering relief to millions of households and businesses as temperatures and electricity demand surge nationwide. Meralco says generation and transmission charges are likely to decline, driven by lower spot market prices and cheaper reserve power costs. According to the Independent Electricity Market Operator of the Philippines, spot market prices fell by 15.3% in April thanks to ample supply and improved grid conditions. Market officials also expect more renewable power to come online this year, helping to ease price pressures in the months ahead. The rollback comes at a critical time as the country grapples with extreme heat and elevated power consumption. On another front, the Philippine government is likely done tapping international debt markets this year, with foreign borrowings already near target and no further global bond issuance expected. The Bureau of Treasury says that the country has almost completed its foreign borrowing program for 2025, making a second global bond sale this year unlikely. The ADB's annual meeting, National Treasurer Sharon Almanza confirmed that the government has raised nearly $3.2 billion, just shy of its $3.5 billion foreign commercial borrowing program for the year. In January, the Philippines sold $3.29 billion worth of dollar and euro bonds, helping shore up budget support without overextending foreign debt. Asian Development Bank is urging the Philippines to step up investments in agriculture and energy, two sectors seen as strategic enablers in navigating the shifting global trade dynamics. The ADB says stronger domestic investments will help the country boost its export capacity and tap growth opportunities, both regionally and globally, amid heightened geopolitical uncertainties. The multilateral lender also notes that the Philippines is relatively less exposed to the full force of U.S. tariffs, facing a 17% duty, the second lowest in the region after Singapore. The ADB says this creates a window for the Philippines to strengthen its trade position, but only if the country can scale up infrastructure and production in key sectors. And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Thank you for joining us. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.